Ladies and gentlemen, while we finish up our breakfast, we're going to just change things up a little. We're going to get our political analyst, Sandile Swana, just to come and make a few observations about what we've heard this morning and the politics in general. And we're going to do the same with Davy Root as we talk about the economy. That'll be a great way to lead into the people that we've got here today on the panel answering some of the questions that will emerge from that. So carry on, and while you're finishing off, I'd like to welcome to the stage Mr. Sandile Swana. Sandile.
Thank you so much, Mike, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe before I start making my remarks, let me just make another statement that will leave some of you guessing maybe. There are several ways of stopping being a member of the ANC, an active member. One of them is what is called gatekeeping, when they lock you out. You can be locked out. When a faction that doesn't believe in your views makes it impossible for you to take up membership or to renew your membership, and they keep you out. They call it gatekeeping. However, I will make this point that there's a term that was used here. Many of you will know that from the early 80s, through the good offices of Dr. Alan Busak, a churchman, the idea of a UDF was formed, and that term has been used in some ways here by Dr. Mulder. So when we joined these politics, at that time, it was the UDF. The ANC was a banned organization. But the ANC was unbanned whilst we were still activists. I noticed something. I noticed a position that differences of opinion are not as easy to accommodate. And I'm a man of very controversial views. And I realized that I'll be put through a disciplinary on very short notice and expelled anyway. So that sort of showed me direction as well. The last thing I'll say about these introductory remarks is that in the 1994 election, I did not only vote for the ANC. Now, making this statement public about my secret ballot. My vote was split, having been what I would consider myself a committed freedom fighter. But during my student years before 1994, I had come to the conclusion that the ANC needs to be diluted. You can't take it sonor. Good as it was, I had come to that conclusion. I was a student of African development economics and African development economics at Wits. And studying many African countries, I realized that having a liberation movement in its purest form is not the wisest thing you can do. So I split my vote between a very small party and the ANC. That small party was called the DP at the time. I'll leave it there. Now let's come to the remarks I would like to make about what was happening here. The ideas that were put forward by Mmusi Maimane about looking at the longest lasting coalition in South Africa, which is the ANC alliance, the tripartite alliance. I think that is a shrewd observation. And why I appreciate that observation is that it accords with some of my training and experience in life. Some of you, the minute somebody says you can learn something good from the ANC, you close your minds already. Not realizing that, I have said in some circles that, I was one of those people who were growing up, we ended up hating on the IFP. But I said to my comrades in those days that, comrades, you must also listen to what Gachabuteles has got to say, because he might happen upon a good idea, even by mistake one day, and you miss out because you hate the guy. So, what Mmusi Maimane and Dr. Connie Mulder are actually trying to teach us in different ways, and I think it's important politically. I have never been a communist. I have never been a member of the AWP. There was a Terre Blanche. I've never been a supporter of his organization. Never been a supporter of the SACP. But I want them in the room when we are discussing the future of this country. Freedom Front Plus and the EFF, I want them in the same room for the fact that they differ. They are equally South Africans. So, when you start being a privately registered political party, banning other political parties who have votes, and you say we're banning this one now, then we're not building a South Africa. I'm Xhosa, I am not Zulu, I'll never be Tswana. But you have to accept that I'm a South African. So why must other South Africans be banned by other South Africans? Are we back to 1960 now? Let's not ban anybody. Don't be afraid of open debate. So that would be my view on that issue. That this UDF that we are talking about, the new UDF, and I had to underline that the idea of a UDF came from a churchman, a theologian that I favor, Alan Busak, competent theologian. Think about that. Why are you unable to sit with Connie Mulder? Me, I'm a black man. Why am I unable to sit with him? Or why, if you are white, are you unable to sit with the EFF? I live in Krugersdorp, in Muldersdrift, in the plots there, with the Boers. Let's continue. Another issue is this. What is our problem? I think many economists will tell you that right up to 2008, the economy of South Africa was doing relatively well. And the ANC government was becoming more and more popular. They reached 69.69% in the 2004 election. So almost 70%. That was not because Mbeki had charisma. Mbeki had no charisma. He has no charisma even now. He was simply doing his job and performing and delivering solid economic results. And that made the ANC popular. Performance, not liberation credentials. Mandela didn't get the results in the vote that Thabo Mbeki got. It was actual, tangible results. So I have a view that maybe we'll need to look at two things. I won't be long. One, if we're talking politics, and this issue was raised here a little bit by is it Dr. Schrober from the DA. We have been taken by surprise on many occasions, where a cabinet, a municipal council, a provincial government is announced. And these three criteria are not considered when this selection is made. One, competence. The people who are appointed to the cabinet, starting with the president, competence is not considered. A track record of performance. When we appoint people to this position, the track record of performance must be there. Three, honesty or lack of corruption. Honesty, just basic honesty. Honesty. These three things. It doesn't help you guys that now, and I'm coming to this point that was made here. I wrote to the ANC and I wrote to the EFF. I haven't returned to this moonshot. But this was my question. Can you then before the next election, show us before we vote who you are going to put in the cabinet. What is the cabinet going to look like? Because if I were to call it HR, our ability to select right people into positions or HR practices in politics are in question. We are starting to have an emblem of choosing the wrong people into office. Those people who lack competence, who lack honesty, and who lack a track record of performance. And then things never get done. At some point, the ANC got things done. Then they chose this other avenue of choosing people who are impotent, who cannot get anything done, and who get everything wrong that can be done, that is wrong, they do it. And the right things they don't do. So those are issues that we need to converse. The Auditor General has pointed out for 9 years running the things that must be corrected. I don't know of any single coalition that said in their manifesto that one of their points, if they have 5 points, is to make sure that all the findings of the Auditor General are implemented. Even Gayton Mackenzie, he started talking about bringing God to church, and I'm a Christian and a Methodist preacher myself. But is that in the Constitution? Is that in the Municipal Structures Act or Municipal Systems Act? Is that in the MFMA? Because that's what we are supposed to go and implement there. Not some arbitrary idea that you conjure up along the way. So I think that every South African must be treated as a valid South African. Every registered political party that is not deregistered or disqualified must not be banned by other political parties. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Working. Got my disco microphone on so that I can dance while we do this thing. Thank you, Sandile. Once again, some common sense by a guy who knows what he's talking about, and that's why our interviews have been so popular. But the man who always, whenever I interview him, I end up with many, many views because he doesn't hold back and he knows his stuff. And that is, in my opinion, South Africa's leading economist, and that is Davie Root from the Efficient Group. Davie, let's talk about the money.
Thank you, Mike. There are many good economists in South Africa. Far better economists than me, I can promise you that. Thank you very much for the invite this morning. Just a few comments, and I think a good place to start. This is the State of the Nation. I think that's an excellent video to start off this morning. And maybe let's just remind ourselves what the state is supposed to be. Why do we have something called a state? Well, a state is something basically that monopolizes violence. The state monopolizes violence. And there's a contract, an agreement between us, the people, and the state. And the agreement is simply, we will not take the law in our own hands, and we will allow the state to monopolize violence, as an example, and we are prepared to pay for the state by way of various taxes, and the state will protect us. So the primary function of the state, the reason why the state exists, is to protect us. Now, what we saw last week is a state using exactly that, the monopolization of violence, to attack us. And as far as I'm concerned, that is an example where the state broke this pact, this agreement between the people and the state. And that means that we have the right to withhold our taxes. I'm not saying I'm suggesting a tax revolt, certainly not. I think if we stop paying taxes, it's going to lead to chaos, it's going to lead to many millions of people really suffering. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, this is very important and very serious, and the politicians must think about the importance of that crucial one primary function of the state, and that is to protect us. The second thing I want to mention is that politicians quite often talk about government revenue. Now, I analyze fiscal accounts quite a lot. It's not government's revenue. The money belongs to the state. You are simply there to manage the state on our behalf. You work for us. Politicians must remember that always. All right, that's just by way of background. A couple of things that I think are important for our new political leadership to understand, those challenges are in the South Africa and in the South African economy. And I want to point out a few, and I will ask the political leaders whether they will be able to manage these specific issues. But before I get to that, I just want to tell you what I think, what the political scene is going to look like in South Africa. Now, the politicians are all going to disagree with me. I think the most likely scenario, and the next year's election, is that the ANC is going to get round about 50, just below 50, just above 50, somewhere there. That's the most likely scenario. I believe with 1 or 2 or 3 smaller political parties, the ANC will still be in government. That is a bad outcome. There could be a worse outcome, and that's with the ANC getting down to, say, 40%, for example, what Herman has been pointing out. And if they do get down to 40%, then we're talking about an ANC-EFF coalition. That's a worse outcome. Chances that the opposition political parties can be the next government, the coalition government in South Africa, I don't think is that good. But what I do believe is that we are at the beginning of a political transition. We are at the beginning of the end of the ANC at least. And I do believe that political parties must come together and to talk about the coalition after next year's coalition. But I'm afraid the next 5 years is going to be really tough for us in South Africa. And if there is a chance of the political parties putting a coalition together, they also have to understand what the challenges are. But I'm afraid the next 5 years is probably going to be business as usual, which is a bad situation. Now, here are a couple of things. The local authorities in South Africa are mostly bankrupt. The local authorities are just not working. Local authorities are crucially important to any business because that's your first contact with an authority. You need working local authorities. The same goes for the provinces in many instances. The state-owned enterprises have mostly been run into the ground operationally and financially. We know all about Eskom, but the same goes for the post office, for the NEL, all of them. They are bankrupt. You have to understand that if you want to fix this country, you have to fix the state-owned enterprises. And there are 2 ways of fixing it. Actually fixing it, or allow the private sector to do that. And I think that is what's going to happen. In fact, what is happening in South Africa today, we are privatizing everything. We've already privatized the police. There are more than 3 times as many private sector security people than police. We've privatized the police. I mean, the primary function of the state has been privatized. Can you believe that? We are in the process. We've privatized the airways because South African Airways is just not working anymore. We are in the process of privatizing Eskom. Of course, that's not official a policy of government, but it's simply stopped working. The post office has stopped working. So you need to fix that, and that's going to cost you a lot of money. Something very important is that we need to fix the fiscal accounts. Now that is what central government is about. It is about the fiscal accounts. The fiscal accounts is where do you get the taxes from, and what do you do with that money, and how much money do you borrow in the process. Now let me give you some numbers. The beginning of this year, the Minister of Finance budgeted for a fiscal deficit of 4% to GDP. So he's going to borrow 4% relative to the size of the economy. But he forgot to include the money that he's going to transfer to Eskom as well. The IMF pointed that out to him. So you have to add that to that as well. He also forgot about this most recent promise to the local authorities that if you do A, B, and C, we're going to write off some of your debt to Eskom, for example. That's also not included. He also forgot to include the huge increase in the wage for civil servants. He also forgot to put in a realistic growth expectation for this year, which is going to be nothing. The economy is not going to grow this year, which means the revenue is going to be under a lot of pressure. And remember, when you talk about things relative to the size of the economy, if the economy is smaller, then all those numbers are moving in the wrong direction. So we're probably going to see a fiscal deficit this year well in excess of 6% to GDP. This is bad. We're talking about state debt levels, currently around about 70% of GDP. But you have to include Eskom, you have to include the local authority, you have to include all these other things. The actual debt to GDP ratio currently is probably close to about 85% to GDP. And it's increasing at a rate of 3-4% per year. It's become unsustainable. In the meantime, the Minister of Finance is like stepping on the gas. He's got a huge fiscal deficit, boosting demand in the economy, actually, pushing in the process, keeping inflation elevated, and the Reserve Bank doing exactly the opposite. The Reserve Bank is stepping on a brake, trying to get inflation lower. You have to understand, as a new government, that you have to fix this. You have to reduce the fiscal deficit. You have to reduce this huge stimulus in the economy in order to make it easier for the South African Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank is fighting a losing battle. And like I've said, I think the ANC is going to be in power for the next 5 years in any event. And I believe in 2 or 3 years' time, we're going to see real inflation in South Africa, because at the end of next year, there will be a new governor at the South African Reserve Bank. Who's that going to be, I wonder, if I have a new government in South Africa? Will they appoint another walk like Lesetja Kganyago, the right person for the job? Or are they going to appoint some populist somewhere? Because that's what I'm worried that the ANC might decide to do. Those are the challenges that our new government, whoever it's going to be, will need to face. And then perhaps the last one. We have 30 million people in South Africa that are directly dependent on the state for an income every month. 30 million. 28 million of them are grant recipients. 2 million of them are civil servants, which are basically grant recipients. Let's be honest about that. They are mostly overpaid, they're mostly underworked. If you want to fix the fiscal accounts, you have to go to South Africa Democratic Teachers Union and tell them, listen, you guys are not doing your job. We have to fire a lot of you and appoint a couple of competent people. We have to go to the police and fire people. You have to go to the local authorities and you have to fire people if you want to make this country work. But the good news is, at least, I think we are at the beginning of the end of the ANC, and I'm very glad to see that the political parties are talking to one another, but we are in very, very deep trouble, and I'm afraid the next 5 years is going to result to even more poverty and more unemployment in this country. But thereafter, we can start building a new South Africa. Thank you.
Yeah, Darby, for telling us that bad news. You can sit on the little chair, and Sandile can sit next to you, because that's also, he also admitted that he was once a member of the ANC. You can also be on the naughty chair. And I'd like to invite our party leaders back up on stage so that we can just put 1 or 2 questions to them about what they had to say when they were on stage earlier. So we've got lots of microphones. Now I've got one of these. You can move this one. Wherever. This is part of the test to see who sits in which chair. So you can make an observation based on which chair they choose.
Just by sitting on the right does not make me a right wing.
So there was a lot of things mentioned. Obviously, these things must come out. Here we have an audience of a whole lot of very concerned South Africans. Do you think that by being here this morning, there's a feeling that they're feeling better about the future of South Africa, or worse about the future of South Africa? Right? And I'll let that question hang in a minute, and then I'm going to ask for your opinion there. Dr. Mulder, what do you think?
If Davy didn't speak, I think we would have felt a lot better. But it's always necessary to get all the facts on the table and to deal with reality. I think we should take note of what is being said, and that is the economic reality. But you can change things around if you get people enthusiastic about that, despite the challenges. I just simply think we cannot afford a further 5 years of this current government where there will be nothing left. So I think people should not leave despondent or think that we have not made progress. I think this was an interesting opportunity to see what's happening amongst the political parties and what's playing out at the moment. I remain optimistic, and I want you to be the same.
Then I want to just pick up on a point, and then I'm going to hand over to Sandile and Davy to ask a few questions. You can pick on whoever you like. I'm going to start with my good friend here, Mr. Cilliers, and ask you, is it realistic to say that somebody is driving you into the hands of the ANC? That's a little bit like saying, you're driving me to drink, right? If you keep on doing this, I'm going to start drinking myself to death, right? When one says something like that, is that, who's that meant to frighten, or is that meant to just give you the excuse to do what you wanted to do in the first place?
So the DA really has driven me to drink.
Okay.
I mean,
Drink's fine.
That's a fact. But it's to paint the picture. I mean, we're not saying that we don't have a choice. I mean, ultimately we decide what we do.
But you said you don't have a choice. You said they're driving you into the hands, as in it's not your choice.
No, you have choices, but the choice is either you become what Action SA is to the DA, which is basically just an abused partner, or you remain autonomous, which we have chosen to do.
Do you feel like an abused partner, Turvin?
Without any doubt. But I think
He said yes.
it's a very necessary abuse because this abuse is preventing the ANC EFF from government in municipalities where we represented. But definitely, and I think one thing that I would really want the audience to know, the change in this country come 2024, it's not going to be made by people in this room. Change is going to be brought about by people in somewhere else, not here, obviously. I think people in the audience here, great South Africans, and I know they're going to vote. But at the end of the day, what's going to bring change is to mobilize those who have given up on voting, and that's really what we're focusing on as Action SA. That's why, on a short-term basis, to prevent the ANC from ever coming back into government, we preventing this, we are allowing ourselves to abuse for the sake of our country and avoid ANC in government. As I indicated to you on Saturday, it's on record when the exploited South Africans are saying, please, within 7 days, if you don't you really get what is in the contract, pull out. And I said, you want me to give you to the hyenas? And they said, please, we understand why you're allowing yourself to be abused. It's actually not, you really, in simple terms, call it abuse. Not abuse. It's really been strategic. It's to really know what you want, and we are doing this for our country.
Leon, you've had a few bombs thrown your way, right? You have been the biggest, you are the official opposition party, so therefore the biggest portion at this stage based on historic results. There's a lot of stuff being said about you and your, well, not you, your organization.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Look, like I said, I don't think it is in the interest of the opposition project and alternative for us to get into that kind of mudslinging, Jerry Springer-like thing. Now, I know Driekus du Plessis made us very proud at the MMA fight, but some of us aren't built for that. So for me, what I would simply say is that political parties have choices, and to suggest that you don't have agency and that we must simply look at every decision you make as someone else's fault is a cop-out. And also, Mike, I would say, I think everyone in a coalition to some extent feels abused in the broad sense that you can't always get your way. That is in the nature of compromise. And I don't think anyone who's involved in those kind of discussions ever feels like, you know, this is a wonderful, everyone wants its own majority. Every party on this stage wants their own majority. So it is tough, but I think also, frankly, some of the people on this stage demonstrate that you can make the choice to actually not work with the ANC. If you are in government with them in 12 different places, if you are mentioned in the state capture report, I think this is an important thing that people don't necessarily know. Volume 5 of the state capture report mentions that the State Security Agency actually helped fund the creation of the Patriotic Alliance to target the DA in the Western Cape. But even if you don't want to talk about any of that, or the money that was raised here in Sandton and that seemingly can't be accounted for, which, by the way, is the media saying that. So what happened here this morning is not an attack on the DA, it's an attack on the media. And you must go and talk to News 24 and Daily Maverick, but I think it's a red flag when we start seeing media attacks. Even if you don't want to engage on any of those points, the fundamental question is this: is it in the interest of the opposition cause that we've been all engaging about here this morning to try and get the DA out of government in the Western Cape and put the ANC there in coalition. Is that in the interest of the project we are working on? For me, the answer is a clear no. Thanks.
I'm tempted to respond to the last remark about the Western Cape. I'm the leader of our party in the Western Cape. And when Dr. Schreiber spoke about successful coalitions earlier, he forgot to mention the Western Cape. Of the 25 municipal councils in the Western Cape, the Freedom Front Plus is in coalition with the Democratic Alliance in 11 of those 25 councils. You won't often hear that, obviously, when you are being told that the Western Cape is the best run province. That's part of that, plays a role. But it's true when he says that political parties would prefer to have the position where they govern alone. That's ideal, maybe so. But I've become a staunch supporter of coalition governments. Why? Because no party are entitled to claim that they've got all wisdom and they know the best. And the moment when you go into coalitions, you are forced to compromise. And I'm a great believer in combined decision-making and making compromises where the best ideas come onto the table. And in the Western Cape, if you look at the last result, I think the DA ended with, approximately 55% in the last election. The reality is that we may end up with a coalition in the Western Cape. The Freedom Front Plus is growing in the Western Cape. Patriotic Alliance is growing in the Western Cape. But our intention is not for 1 second to put the ANC in power in the Western Cape. As a matter of fact, I think the ANC has given up on the Western Cape, and correctly so.
Dr. Mulder just forgot about the growth of Action SA in the Western Cape.
Of course.
Can I just remind him about it?
Of course, of course.
Mmusi.
Sorry, thanks. I must be honest. I want to answer your first question. How would you feel if you listened to it? I won't lie. As a South African, and it is deeply frustrating to regurgitate local government issues on a permanent national platform, the extensive bickering that occurs. And here's the other painful thing. It's not even bickering about you want to spend 3% on the budget for road infrastructure and I want to spend 2%. It's bickering about you want that position, this one sent me this WhatsApp. It's all bullshit, to be honest with you. And I'm sorry to say it, but that's all it is. And I'm not trying to be better than anyone. I'm just frustrated because when I look to the right, Davi posits a picture of the next 5 years and what they look like, and whether we can bicker about which position we want or don't want, the reality of it is that numbers don't lie. And those numbers are knocking at our door. South Africa is not unique in some instances. We are part of the global environment that needs a broader reshape. And a couple of things I want to highlight here. Where I might disagree a little bit with Davi is that there's capital reserves that are looking for investment. That is the reality. The developed world is having a negative growth rate or birth rate equally so. We sit in a continent where the median age is younger, population growth is increasing. So there are two questions we've got to face. Are we going to create a government capable of responding to that capital demand as the first question? And the second, what happens with the population dividend of 1.2 billion people in this continent? I'll tell you another. China had to respond to a similar question at the same time as that. And so here's some basic facts. If we fail to move 300 million people from poverty to a middle class, we will have death rates in this continent like we've never seen before. So to me, the questions, yeah, fair enough. I get the shenanigans, I get all of that. But there are some genuine questions that are both existential, but have a massive opportunity. We should equally so in this conversation be discussing how do we leapfrog some of the developmental fields. That's why, in some ways, this is where I'm very cautious, who as one, to say when you take on this economic trajectory that we seem to be on, not negate some of the opportunities that digitization presents, if we're willing to build that infrastructure and might give us a leapfrog going forward, not negate some of the things that this continent has in its own advantage relative to other continents? And then lastly, how do we as South Africa, given some of our legal framework, given some of that, I do think the missing link in the coalition discussion that we're not having here is how capable a state do you build? I always tell people, I say to them, you can give all of us golf clubs. I've never played golf. But if you gave Tiger Woods plastic golf clubs and you gave me proper golf clubs, I suspect I'll beat him, having not played in my life. Because you cannot implement any policy without an effective state. And in truth, one of the issues that's missing in this conversation is where's the Public Service Commission as it comes to reorientating the state for the purpose of delivery. If we do not reorientate how government works, I promise you, you can put any government on the table, you will achieve nothing because the outcomes will be the same. So I really believe we need to take the conversation and drive it forward. That's why I've been frustrated with any pact and this and that. I'm frustrated because the discussions end up invariably being about this one, that one. They have to come back to what are we going to do about South Africa on the 6th of June, 2024, after the elections and 2 weeks of negotiations, and then you have to form a new government. What is going to happen then?
But well said, Mmusi. But you are the one person on the stage that favors race-based economic policies.
Mike, I want to respond directly to that question. We have a history of race-based policy that has abused many citizens.
So we want to do it again.
So, no, let's be clear on this issue. When I talk about justice, right, I favor justice. And justice cannot negate. When you say race-based, you make it sound like it's racism. No, it's not. It's actually an understanding of the fact that community like Khayelitsha, as an example, is a historical function of an apartheid government that said black people will live there. Now, I can sit here and say, oh, well, it's just poverty, it's this. Or I can actually deliberately intervene. That is not to exclude white people in that picture. That is to say black and white must work together to address injustices. Otherwise, we'll never have peace. Now, BBBEE has failed. I do not deny that. But it does not mean, in and of itself, that we cannot sit down and say collectively as black and white South Africans, what policy do we introduce as a function of justice? I swear, if you speak to many white South Africans and you invite them to a journey of saying, look, let's attend to this community, let's attend to this economic problem, they'd be the first to respond to that issue because they recognize that if we're going to build this united in our diversity South Africa, we have to address this very pernicious history that we have, that the ANC has failed to address. So I'm not sitting here as one who is racist. I'm sitting here saying, if you want for racism to prevail, continue on the path of BBBEE, continue on the path of ignoring the plight of many black South Africans, and see where you're going to end up. That's a reality.
Is that not similar, Sandile, I'm going to put this one to you. Is that not similar when people say, scrap the Constitution because we've got high crime rates in a state where the Constitution isn't being applied in the first place?
No, sorry, it's not similar. I want to be clear here, Mike, because I don't want you to put words in my mouth. The Constitution makes it clear that we must favor redress. It's clear. I've upheld the Constitution of the Republic. When we say, I'll use my home as an example. My wife's a white South African, I'm a black South African. We have mixed race kids. Both of us realize that we must intervene. We don't come home and say we are colorblind. We come home and recognize the diversity that we are under. Now we must attend to issues of injustice that they occur. We uphold the Constitution of this country that wants and demands redress. Otherwise, this country will never be peaceful. We can try and play games all we like. The reality is the profound level of our own history and its presence. So one of the ideas I've got, and I'll be honest with you, I've asked for a jobs and justice fund. I've said let's contribute to those, particularly citizens, particularly even corporates that have benefited under an apartheid legislation that favored them. Let's create a jobs and justice fund so that we can fund the education of kids who have been left out of the system. I think it would be beneficial for those companies to get a new skilled pipeline of black South Africans who can work within their spaces. What's wrong with that? It's an invitation to build a South Africa that we want, that can be united in our diversity. Now we can sit back and say, well, let's just be colorblind and ignore our own history and see where we end up. We are going to have what looked like riots in July last year. We're going to have a repetition of those with politicians who want to be populist, say, this is not our economy, so we can loot and burn it all we learn. It would be in our interest for all of us to have a stake in our economy, because trust me, then you have no interest in burning any economic infrastructure when you are a participant in that economy.
Sandile?
Thank you, Mike.
Just, yeah. No, that's on, just a bit closer.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Let me make this point. As a youngster, I studied the French Revolution, and I still from now and again study aspects of French society, and I've been following the riots, and that's my kind of spirit, the riots in France, right now. There's a reason for this. In France, when the revolution broke out, they were calling for equality, liberty, and fraternity, because there was inequality in that society. But all of them were white, if you want to call them that. So till today, Piketty is one of the most respected economists in the world, and he's still studying equality, and he's a Frenchman. And they've been, if you want to see the most spectacular protests, watch the French, because of social injustice. But they are all white, generally speaking. Obviously, immigration and other things have been happening. And I want to say about South Africa that if already, call it 90% of the population, in fact, more than 90% of the population is already black. That is Indian, colored, and African. Now, where that takes you to when you are developing the nation, your policies must be able to say that if we are favoring people with education or favoring people with that, if you put your hand in the box at random, and 90% of that population is black, you have a higher chance of pulling out the black one. Statistically, it is going to work like that. So you've got to understand that that is what you've got to do. Secondly, as Mmusi says, in parts of South Africa, because of what was done before, the people are already physically separated. In any case, not that in every suburb the demographics are exactly the same. Kailicha, Soweto, and so on are black and so on. So you've got to pay attention to that. And the attention that we need to pay to people is that people need to get out of poverty. I am 100% against the champions of the poor. I am for the champions of prosperity. That our people need to own assets. I was born in Soweto, Msimango Street, Rockville, in the 60s. A lot of the people I was born with are already dead. The others have never gotten a job, etc., etc., etc. That needs to be corrected. 350 rands and all these other stories that are going on, to the extent that they don't make black people rich or any other person rich, they are a waste of time. So have a process that uplifts society, eliminates poverty across the board, and elimination of poverty for me is the creation of wealth, not income. I've never prioritized income, and I think to prioritize income is a waste of time. People must have assets. They must own the means of production, and they must have their own assets. And it has been proven that this is how you eliminate poverty. Not these little programs. BEE had good intentions, but I think we know that there are many other problems in the state, and Mmusi is correct as well to say you need to correct the state. There's a lot of, it's vulnerable. State capture highlighted that there's architectural problems there, and so on and so forth.
I'm going to come to Dr. Schreiber in a minute, but there's somebody who's got a lot of experience in this, and by far the most accomplished businessman on the stage is Mr. Herman Mashaba, who did it against all odds. And Herman, you've got strong views on this point.
Well, I think, you know, what Sandy Les just said is actually quite profound for me, because you don't take people out of poverty by dividing a nation. I think we fought a system of apartheid by the National Party to divide us along racial lines. And we had an opportunity in 1994 to unite this country and deal with redress. But you don't deal with redress by further dividing the nation like what we are right now. If you look at South Africa today, we're more divided than we were pre-1994, which is actually quite sad. The majority of our people today, they live in squalor, where I was born in a village, lived most part of my youth in a tin house, 2-room, no two bedrooms, because my father, for some reason, forgot to build my mother a house. They continued making babies, but forgot that when you make babies, you must have accommodation for them. The kind of poverty that I see people living, the squalor, it's actually quite sad. And how do you address this? You know, in 1984, because I wanted to be successful, and I decided PW Botha is not going to be in charge of my own life. I approached an Afrikaner, Johan Krill, to say, Johan, you can make this stuff. Joseph and I can sell it. Black people wants to be pimped out there. Please, can we go and pimp them, and we make the money ourselves? Johan and I did not just really make money. I think if I look at the social impact of our relationship, anyone can use a study of history. You can really go and really go deep into this to really look at that relationship, as much as it was commercial, but the social impact was massive, because it gave us an opportunity to build a huge factory right in Mabopane, in the township, employing people, getting equal opportunities. Today, some of them, they live in the big suburbs because of working for me for some of them more than 30 years and so forth. And that's what I thought the new South Africa was going to do, because look at this country. If we were enjoying a 5% growth like what New South Africa started, with a number of white people in this country, can they be a threat to us as black people? Because of our numbers, we've got to really be crazy. We allow the economy to grow, invest in education, because the whites, if they are racist, they want to employ their own. In an economy that's growing at 5% plus, I can tell you, whether they like it or not, they're going to have black MDs, they're going to black engineers, that, and so forth. So you don't divide the nation as a way of getting people out of poverty. Get people out of poverty by growing the economy, create a social cohesion, and don't obviously take shortcuts. Take a long-term view. And unfortunately, with these BE policies that have now created oligarchs and created poverty we've never seen in the world.
And the numbers back that up, Davi, quite simply, and that is that amongst the whites, more or less, you've got 100% employment. Therefore, what is the point of the policy?
Yeah, I must tell you, Mike, I was wondering when race is going to come into the discussion here. I've done a lot of research on the various races. Now, first of all, we've got this weird system in South Africa that's based on certain races, and you get categorized some race somewhere. And I've decided I want my own race. And even my company, I get so angry at this, but because I want my own category. And I'm a hybrid. I want to be called a hybrid from now on. And the reason why I'm a hybrid is because I'm a mixture between two species. I'm Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis. I've got 3% Homo neanderthalensis, Neanderthal man, or caveman, in my genes. I've analyzed my genome, really. My wife says it's much more than that. But it's this artificial thing about categorizing people. And if we're gonna keep on doing this, then I'm afraid any possibility of a coalition going forward is going to be dead in the water. There must be only one way, if you want to appoint a person to a certain position, there's only one thing that matters, and that's merit. That's all. Only merit, nothing else. I've done a lot of research on race, Mmusi, just by the way. Look at various races and how these artificial categories, how they compare to one another. And I can tell you, if we have a policy in South Africa of white economic empowerment, it's not going to work because we've run out of white people. We just don't have white people left anymore. And what is going to happen over the next couple of years, it doesn't matter what kind of policies we have, we will have a more inclusive South Africa. That is going to happen. And if you really want to empower people, you start where it really matters. Where it really matters, and that's primary education. That is by far the single most important thing. That's probably going to take us at least 20 years to fix education in South Africa. If you want to empower people, create an environment that's safe where people can do their business. If you want to empower people, make sure that they have electricity that's affordable, for example. That's how we empower people, by creating wealth. And we had a bit of a discussion on the table already. And I think you touched on some of those. You listen, and I must tell you, politicians, even opposition politicians in South Africa, are quite boring. Not much original coming from them. So and they all jump on the same, they all jump on the same bandwagon. I'm waiting for somebody. We've had this discussion on the table already. I'm waiting for somebody to talk about those three major evils: unemployment, inequality. Somebody's going to say this here. Somebody's going to jump and say, we're going to create jobs. We're going to create jobs. Come with something new. And I've got a few suggestions. We don't have a poverty problem in South Africa. You touch on that. That's not a poverty problem. The problem is we don't have enough rich people. That's the problem. We don't have an unemployment problem in South Africa. The problem is we've got an employment problem. That's the problem in South Africa. We don't have an inequality problem. I don't give a shit about inequality. As long as the poor people are better off. And for that, you need one thing only. You need economic growth. And you can only get economic growth if there's confidence in government. And that's the biggest challenge to start off with. We know all these things. Confidence is the lowest it's ever been in the South African government and in the police and in everything else. You can leave if all these indices are available. And my advice to politicians, start with something very, very small. You need a small success story, a tiny success story to show that we can pick something that's going to be cheap, that everybody's going to support you with, and something that everybody will see. And I've got two very simple suggestions. The one is fix traffic. Just fix the traffic. Just apply the traffic rules. You've got a budget for that. You've got the police for that. Throw all these speed cops in jail that take all these bribes. Just fix the traffic. Stop at the red light. Just do that. Everybody will support you. Everybody will see that, and it will be a success story. The second one is just clean a place up. Just clean it up. Like what they're doing in Rwanda. Every Saturday morning, the president go on TV. This morning, we're going to clean the place up. Just clean it. And once you've proved that you can do one or two small things, then you can really tackle the big things, and then people will trust you.
Can I just come in?
Dr. Shah has been noted.
Just for a minute. I think, Davi, you are not going to fix traffic lights if you don't allow the rule of law to be supreme. Because if we are going to allow our infrastructure to be destroyed by criminal elements with impunity, you can fix as much as you want. Unfortunately, you're going to put in a new traffic light. The very same night, it's going to be taken down. So the rule of law, it's a fundamental issue that we really need, and which is actually missing in this country. Everything else will be academic if we're not going to have consequences for criminality in South Africa.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Mike. I would venture to say that maybe we've reached the moment in this conversation to answer your initial question, where we do feel some kind of positivity. I think if we can just imagine now having these perspectives and some of the things that have been said here around one table, actually forming that kind of common minimum understanding of what a new government would do about an issue like redress, for example, about the state collapse that we experience around us. That, I think, for me, is where the positivity lies in this conversation. We need to go and have those frank, policy-based discussions about what are the minimum things that we can agree on. There's so many things that divide us, like things divide South Africans. What are those minimum things? I think if you look at the race quotas issue that we've recently seen introduced as an intensification of the divide and rule kind of discussion that we've been having, surely those are the things that we say is down the wrong road, what does the right road look like? And it answers some of the concerns that Mmusi has raised about this should not be just an anti-ANC project. It must be for something. It cannot just be against something. But I do want to suggest to the audience that if there's something positive, it is sort of the nucleus of this discussion. Then I just want to say to Davi about your initial point regarding scenarios for next year and what's likely and not. I think on the first, in the first instance, from the DA's point of view, we regard it as a moonshot for exactly that reason. It is not something that's just going to happen automatically. It's going to take a Herculean effort that we've never seen before for people to actually pull together and try and achieve that objective. So I take that point. But I want to say two things in response. The first one is, let's not leave the provinces out of the calculation. It's a critical point. Because even if the scenario of a 47% ANC with the small parties at a national level does materialize, it almost by definition means that the ANC would have lost Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal by more substantial margins, just on the maths of the calculation. And I think that is why, again, the pact discussion, whatever scenario manifests, is critically important for us to then understand, look, if those provincial scenarios end up materializing, do we have a path to power there? Do we have an agreement to work together? What are the minimum policies we want to implement to fix Gauteng, to fix KwaZulu-Natal? And I think it's an interesting discussion because for a long time it's been about, the Western Cape trying to get out of the trap of national government, fix things beyond what national government has sort of dealt the province. But you watch that conversation take off in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng if we can bring about this kind of change. So I think that that's important. The second thing is we must never lose sight of when we talk about election outcomes as they stand, it's always about the people who voted in the last election. But there are 27 million people in this country who are disillusioned, who are either registered, 14 million, 13 million who are not voting. Now here's the crazy thing. If we get between 10 and 20% of that group to vote, it's more votes than the ANC got in the 2021 election, 5.3 million. If you get 10 to 20%, and even if you get 10% additional, 2.7 million, to, as I say, be the rising tide that lifts all boats, you start having a very different picture quickly. Now, it's hard to measure where are disillusioned voters, but if the project succeeds, I fundamentally believe we're going to start pulling those people back into the political process, and that is good for democracy. Because what you don't want is people who have checked out of the system, who say, it doesn't matter what options are on the table, none of them appeal to me. That's a dangerous thing for us going forward. Lastly, Mike, the point about the state. And it's a shame that Mayor Brink has left us now, because I think no one can testify to what happens when you want to put your foot down on the accelerator and the car doesn't move, like he can. Because when you have a bureaucracy that's been hollowed out over a 30-year period, that is actually going to be, I believe, the single hardest thing for any new government to address. Even if we get over the hurdle of policies and making better choices, how are we going to implement things? Because the state has been hollowed out by one concept, cadre deployment. And this is something for me personally that is a driving passion of why I'm in politics. We have taken the ANC to court to expose contents of their deployment committee so that we understand how the politicization of the state actually works. And secondly, we are awaiting judgment. And I must share with you, I dreamt about this last night, so it just shows the weird obsession. But I'm waiting for the judgment from the Pretoria High Court on whether cadre deployment is unconstitutional. And if we can get that line drawn in the sand before next year's election, it gives us as an opportunity, as an opposition collective, to start saying, that is now done. The courts have spoken. How do we start over probably years, slowly rebuilding the state so that it can actually deliver on the vision that we are talking about?
And Mike, I wanted to endorse this, the one point which is the missing voter in the conversation. Because that actually, to me, I think South Africa's future scenario depends effectively on an outstanding 12%. I call it the outstanding 12% because it's the 12% that will either get the opposition as a collective over the 50% line, or it's the outstanding majority that beats the EFF. That's another conversation. And it's the outstanding 12% that sits with values of citizens that are not as discussed in its broader outlines. And by that I mean these are citizens that sit in the middle, they've never voted, they are young. And I spent 2 weeks over the month of June visiting high schools, listening to young people who, for them, they'll vote for the first time next year. And I promise you, and I'm sad to confess this, I've been in politics for a long time, but when I looked in the eyes of those young people, I realized that none of us talk to them. And none of us talk to them a language that they translate for their own future. So really the work we've got to do is solve for that. And I'm not convinced personally, I might be persuaded otherwise, that a pact that just simply says, here's the salad of the political parties, let's dish that out and see if they'll consume it, may be the first answer. I'm not convinced of that. Because these are young people whose attendance and audience and their prophets and speakers sit on platforms that are not here. They sit on TikTok, they sit on various places. They listen to influencers that are different to you and I. Therefore, the question is, the job, if you ask me, what is my marching order? Why build one South Africa? People say, you are indifferent about the moonshot pact or this pact or that pact. Is because I'm really animated by the question of that 12% young person who's sitting at home, who is unclear that they're not going to vote for a salad. Let's go engage those kids. They hate me even calling them kids, but let's engage those young people, because those young people hold the key to where this country goes for the next 2 decades.
As we run down the clock, I want to ask one last question, and that is, after what we've heard today, should we be more or less hopeful about the possibility that the pact leads to something that can unseat the ANC? Dr. Mulder.
I think that, as I've said earlier, the pact plays an important role to try to bring some order in the political sphere. But once again, this political sphere, the political parties alone is not going to do it. We need to go much broader than that. We've got the opportunity to get everybody involved. We need to get civil society involved. That's the only way to do that. And if you look at the numbers, Davie is correct. Most likely, it's unlikely that the ANC will lose power. It could be unlikely, maybe, maybe not. But the challenge remains to get and to reach out. And then just to come back to the economic discussion, we've had these discussions with the ANC for 30 years, and there's a different view in terms of how do you get a country to be successful. We need a smaller state. We need to create the opportunities where private business, private enterprise can get out there and get the economy growing. And once you get the economy growing, obviously, many, many things will fall in place. And that's not happening. I sat in numerous portfolio committees when the ANC would call these civil servants and ask them from the departments, how many new jobs have you created in the department? That's not job creation. That's just a dishing out of taxpayers' money. No jobs have been created. Complete misunderstanding of what needs to be done. But to come back to your point, I think that we are closer than we've been in the last 30 years to do a successful takeover of South Africa in a positive way and to bring to South Africa what we should have been doing right from the beginning. I'm very optimistic, I'm very positive about that, and I believe it can be done, definitely.
Well, I think, Mike, the reason why I'm in politics, because I strongly believe that this country's got a last chance and to not be another failed African country, because South Africans are beginning to wake up. And I think we should not really make the mistake to really look at the 17 million people who voted, and we're actually missing a huge, huge opportunity, low-hanging fruit of actually bringing ANC down by actually talking to the disenfranchised voters that Mmusi is under impression he's the only one who's talking to them. Mmusi, I can tell you, as I'm sitting with you right now, I've got teams all over the country engaging with the youth. We not just engaging them, we're registering them with the IEC. As I'm talking to you, we're investing heavily. Every cent that we get as Action SA goes towards making sure that we've got a representative in every street, in every village, We don't just give them the cell phone numbers. We get them airtime. We give them a stipend to really be able to eat. They don't just go and register them as members of Action SA. We register them with the IEC. And mainly who we target, these are the youth. So it's not like we're not really doing anything. There's a reason why, if you look at our performance since 2021, because our performance, historic performance, didn't stop only in 2021. 2 weeks ago, everyone is aware of what we did to the ANC in Ward 7. And you will see we are going to really continue. So that's why I'm positive. I honestly don't understand anyone saying to me that ANC will come into power. Yes, they might come back into power with the support of the EFF, and now we pushing someone who's also growing that we're supposed to be bringing next to us. So ANC, if they come back into power, it would be out of our making as a convention, as a pact. So what we need to do is, let's go for the low-hanging fruit, register people, get them more interested in politics, to make sure that parties like the Patriotic Alliance, we bring them closer to us than actually putting them into the ANC camp. So I'm really quite confident. I'm excited. I know it's not going to be an easy job. It's a job that people are not, there's oligarchs are not going to easily lose their Maseratis and the Bentleys because of us. They're going to do everything possible to destabilize us. But I think South Africa is going to triumph come 2024. Those who still believe that ANC will be in power, it is there. It'll be as a result of us actually making it happen. So I'm positive that we'll save this country.
Can I, Mike, just, I promise you I'll be 30 seconds. I think people who are here, either they are here for good croissants or not, but I want to invite the people who are in this room to this one point. I'd raised it before to say, what if we pushed both public service and private citizens to establish some form of what I call it a jobs and justice fund, but the lesson behind COVID is that actually we had you can criticize the Solidarity Fund for all of its flaws, but in some ways, it acted in a manner that allowed for resources to be channeled to areas that we needed. I'm asking the question, it was a partnership between public and private. I've called for a national jobs and justice fund, because the salvation for South Africa does not sit in what the state does only, it also sits in what the private sector does. And by private sector, I don't just mean private businesses. I mean everyone from micro enterprises and all of that. And then create a national venture capital fund that will fund SMMEs. I think we don't have an we don't have an entrepreneurship shortage. We've got plenty. If we created a fund that's a partnership between public service and private service, we could deliver. And I think for citizens who are sitting in this room, you also can't sit back and say, our politicians and this and that. It's also time for you to roll up your sleeves and say, what am I doing to contribute to the broader stabilization of South Africa?
Please, can you also just understand that for many of the people here, we've got a hand in our wallet that takes taxes and delivers nothing. To ask us to pay money on top of that is a big stretch.
Yeah, no, Mmusi, no, please, come on. No,
Okay.
I mean, we're doing everything. And now you want us to do even more.
No,
Remember, we, the private sector, we grow this economy, we create the jobs, we pay all the taxes, and we give the money to politicians that's supposed to do their jobs. Now you want us to give them more money.
No, I'm asking us to partner better.
No.
Right. I do understand the thing. I think it's definitely a thing that we could sit here all day. But I do want to ask, the smartest guy sitting here today is Charles. Because Charles, you've got a position a bit like the guy who can bet on a horse race after he knows the result. Because you can choose these guys or you can choose those guys, and you can blame them, but you eventually can cast your vote wherever you like.
Look, I think the idea of doing a pre-coalition agreement, some kind of a pact, it's got its pluses because you can get civil society excited, you might be able to generate more funding for a united front. So I think that to that extent, that's worth talking about. But at the end of the day, all of us here have to go out. And we have to convince people to vote for us. And we have to try to convince, that's what we've been hearing here. We have to convince people who haven't been voting to go out there and vote for something new, something different. And I think that's what distinguishes the PA, I think we're hearing the same from Action SA, is that we are a party that does work. We're on the ground every day. We're signing people up. If you go on the PA's website, every week there's thousands more people joining. And I think that's what's scaring other parties, particularly the DA here. We're hearing about things like Operation Mayibuye that started in 2015, and now we're being told that the State Capture Commission somehow found that this thing started the PA, but we contested elections in 2014. We started in 2013, so how on earth did we get started in 2015? So that's just something I had to correct there. But the reality is that it's not hard to run a government. If you actually can't run a municipality, if you can't run a government, then you really are like vertraag, quite frankly. Because you've got no competition, you're supplying the power, you're doing everything. So the failure of government in this country is like the failure of absolute stupidity and incompetence. And you just need someone to step up and do the basics right. Okay. And that's what we've been showing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And let's not give them more power than what they have got. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can safely say that it would be very difficult for the ANC to give every South African more reasons to not support them. But yet somehow they still manage to get support. Hopefully this kind of discussion that we've had today leads to something. It's got to start somewhere. And we're doing what we can. I want to close off by thanking everybody that's made the effort to come out this morning, to be on our panel, everybody that sat here. Most of the people have sat through this. Thank you so much for coming today. I want to thank everybody individually, and thank you all for coming. And this is going to be the first of many that we'll organize like this. Wherever we can influence, we will influence. But this is a country worth saving. Thank you all for joining us on the State of the Nation live breakfast. We'll see you again online. Have a good day. Please go and do some work. We've got an economy to save. Thank you.
We'll be in touch, I'm sure.
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, thank you.